Hi, we're here today with Michel Berger, the CTO of Mimik Technology, and we're going to talk about the edgeSDK that was just released yesterday. So, how do you feel about that, Michel? The edgeSDK was finally released yesterday, and now it's available broadly for developers.
Yeah, I'm so excited because it's been a long time. That I still remember Shavash talking to us a few years ago and saying, "Are we sure we're going in the right direction?" Because everything was new. And we said, yeah, it's the right thing. And then a lot of work, a lot of passion, a lot of debates were triggered. But guess what? Now we are here and we're excited because we have a product, we have an SDK, we can download it, and it works.
So we're excited, but why should developers be excited? Why should they care about the edgeSDK? What can they do with it?
So with the edgeSDK, you basically, it helps when you develop your solution in form of microservice, it helps to distribute your solution in a complete different fashion. Where before you were stuck with the cloud, now you basically can deploy your solution in the cloud, on the edge, or a combination of both. Because basically the combination will help dealing with the latency or the cost of the solution, of running the solution. And that's what developer will want to see, because more choice gives to more opportunities.
So is there a particular type of developer that this would appeal to or that would benefit from the edgeSDK?
So the cloud natives, for me, that's what I'm really focusing on, is the cloud native people who understand microservice, who understand that the solution is not anymore a monolithic, like a one box type solution. They understand this, and they understand this already when you look at a cloud solution. So these people will have zero difficulty to say, all right, now I have more choice on how my solution will be deployed, because there are this edge element which will be offered in order to download microservice in form of containers. The enterprise developer, it will be more difficult, and the difficulty will not necessarily be in using Edge. The difficulty will be more to migrate from a monolithic application to a collection of microservices. And then you have the application people, the application developer, and for them it won't change. Almost nothing will change. They will still call APIs, they will still do what they need to do in the application, and then have an orchestration to call different API. The difference is, instead of calling an API which is in the cloud on an Amazon data center, they will call an API which is in the same device or in a cluster of devices which is on the same network, on the same proximity.
So for those developers that aren't familiar with microservices or haven't, have the enterprise developer with the monolithic application, is transitioning to microservices something that's difficult?
Well, that's the whole dilemma of the industry today, which is basically you have the old way of doing things, which was a client server, and now you have the new way of doing things, which is microservice and cluster of microservice and things of this nature. So it's not a trend that we at Mimik Technology we initiate, because if we were doing this, it would be difficult to move the whole industry. It's actually a trend which Netflix and others have completely onboarded with, and now everybody is following even at enterprise level. So I'm very excited by that, because we're piggybacking on a very, very large movement which is modifying how application and enterprise application are developed.
So for someone who already has an existing application, if they want to use the edgeSDK, do they have to rewrite their entire application? How does that work?
So we have to differentiate, like in the application, sometimes we just talk about the application running on the client. So on the client piece, nothing changed, or very few things change, because the developers still use native language for developing the application. We don't have any constraint around that, but the difference is, instead of pointing to an API which is in the cloud, the application may point to an API which is either on the same device or in the same cluster. For that, we actually help the developer because we have API calls in order to know what these clusters are. So if the application need to know what are all the devices in the surrounding, just an API call on the SDK will give that. Or how many APIs are in the same proximity, just an API call. And that's why we're very keen on API, because that's what application developers are very familiar with. So it's not a rewrite, it's more a pointing to the right direction. The backend, again, is where more change may happen if the application, the backend is still very monolithic, because that will have to change to be in the form of microservice, because we're not pretending that a monolithic application like large will run on a small phone. That will be ridiculous. That will be may lead to some rewrite because we don't deal very well with monolithic. Where we deal well with cluster of microservice and the help of cluster of microservice to actually be deployed in a more optimal fashion.
Where can these microservices run? I mean, what type of computers? Are we talking Linux servers,
So
PCs?
we moved into a mode where we very much similar to Docker in the sense that we have a light version of it, which is important for Android and iOS type device because Docker doesn't run on this platform. When Docker run on the platform, we're basically not competing with Docker. We just use Docker, and that will be a similar view. Which means that from that perspective, we have some constraint because since it's a light environment, the microservice can be developed only in JavaScript, and then there are some libraries on Node.js which actually don't necessarily work, but our website gives you a list of the libraries which actually are usable equivalent libraries in order to develop pretty decent microservice, and that's basically the only constraint we have, which is the fact that the sandbox we developed as part of this containerization was a JavaScript sandbox.
But on the other hand, our microservices, our lightweight container environment does run on mobile devices.
They run on mobile device like Android or iOS, but they also run on Linux platform or Windows platform. So we've covered the whole spectrum, and up to even the small device. And that's what the novelty, in a sense, is. People still see the device as being attached to the solution, where we believe that the device is just yet another element of this whole computing and cloud environment.
And how do we deal with all of these? So we talked about running microservices in different environments, taking an application, partitioning it into several microservices, and then now we have the ability to load those microservices in different locations. How do we organize that? How does the application developer use that?
So the organization aspect, and that's what we also took a big decision not to compete against the very popular orchestration mechanism like Kubernetes and others. Which means that what we decided was to have compatible APIs. Because the more familiar we are to existing environment, the better the adoption will be. And we're not trying to say, hey, everything has to be special. That will be forcing everybody to be in a specific ecosystem. Where here, we have a bunch of APIs which are like very similar to Docker for the management of images, for the management on how to load, how to start a microservice. And then we have registry which are very similar to a Docker registry and things like this. So a lot of things are what developers, the cloud natives in particular, are very familiar with. And that's what we're very keen on. So that's the reason why we're very religious on our APIs, because that's basically what will simplify the whole integration.
Okay, so let's take this up to a high level. Let me see if I got this right. So we have a way to deploy microservices from within an application, and we can partition the application into multiple microservices. We can now put them in different locations. They can run on the same machine. They can run somewhere in the cloud, or they could run on another adjacent machine. Our platform is a way of discovering and organizing and communicating with all of those things. Is that right?
No, that's about right. It's not, for me, that's the reason why I don't see this as a revolution. It's more like an evolution to give more opportunity for a developer. And also an evolution into saying that there is no different ecosystem, like the gaming, IoT, and microservice should be the same thing. It's actually, it should be the same thing because you want to integrate all of this. And that's exactly about a solution which is based on microservice, application which use API. That's basically the crutch of it. The difference is deployment becomes much more diverse. So you don't have just a client and the cloud, you have the application and then you have the cloud, but you also have the cluster of device, the cluster by network, or the cluster of device by proximity or by account, which basically give you an ability to run your solution in a much more diverse mode. And that's what basically we made a big difference on.
So these applications of microservices, they're talking to each other, they're doing kind of complicated networking. Are they calling network APIs, or how does that work?
No, that's what the SDK helps. It hides all of this to the developers. It's kind of like Amazon. When you're on Amazon, you want a resource, you invoke an API, and about 2 minutes later, you have a response saying, okay, your resource is ready, and guess what? You call another API to access it. What happened behind the scene is horrendous. You had to redo routers, you had to program routes, you had to select a machine, you had to put some software on the machine. All of this is completely transparent for the user. Same on the edge. On the edge, connecting to another device, just knowing the cluster is already the big difficult task, and that's the reason why behind the scene we have this notion of supernode, which collect the knowledge, this complex stuff, which basically will make all developers run away if everything was exposed to them. For them, they call an API and they have the knowledge of the cluster. When they have this knowledge of the cluster, they know that they can speak to each of the machines which belong to the cluster. How the communication happen? They don't know. Sometimes it's easy because it's on the same network. Sometimes it's involved tunnels, cloud endpoints, and things like this, which are completely transparent. And that's what the value of the SDK is about. It basically makes all of this technology hidden to a developer which will want to use this as a solution. See, so which means that instead of starting from scratch and arriving to the level they should be, they start from a pretty high level, which means that they can even expand more, because now the difficult part is solved, and now they have to actually do what they have to do for their own solution.
Fantastic.
No problem.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.